Hey, we're Table of Gaming. I'm Brandon, and I play Nords.
I'm Isaac, and I play W'adrhun.
And tonight, we're going to be going over the brand new army list and give you our hot takes on what's good and what maybe not be good.
It's all good.
It's all good.
All right, so we're going to start with the Nord army list, starting with their army-wide ability, Blood of the Einherjar, which gives +1 attack if you've taken any damage, and if you've lost more than half of your total stands, you get Flurry, which doesn't seem that different from what it used to be.
So there is a small difference that actually will be big in gameplay, which is this used to be a draw event. So you'd have to take damage and then activate and then draw. And then since there's only one draw event per activation, if you were a troll, you would have to decide, do I want the blood ability or do I want to regen? Often I wouldn't look at Bastion because as a draw event, why would I spend 15 or 20 points for an ability that would be interfering with my army-wide rules? So this actually opens up a few other things for play, which I think is important. And I think it's just it disregards the entire 2 draw events because now you don't have to have that because it's just you get this and then whatever's on the unit.
Okay, nice. All right. So yeah, pretty cool change. And you've already said the implications of the army, so let's move on. All right, so now we're on to Supremacy abilities, and what those are every army has a warlord, and each warlord contributes a Supremacy ability depending on what unit it is. So it gives you either a passive or an active effect, and we'll just go over what the Nord ones are. I'm looking at the Blooded's Call the Hunt. It used to give the flank special ability, and now it looks wildly different.
Yeah, so before, if the Blooded was on the table, it would give his entire warband flank, which means up to 4 units in that warband would auto-join. Mm-hmm. With the changes to reinforcement, every turn, every army will have 1 unit auto-reinforce without a roll.
Basically, 1 unit per turn gets automatic flank.
Exactly.
Okay.
So with the change to Call to the Hunt is, if your Blooded is on the table, every turn you get 2 auto-reinforce. Those are 2 units get flank. It is not bound by warband anymore, so he could actually be bringing in automatically a Conagur's Ice Jotnar or a Valkyrie's
Volva.
Volva's Valkyries.
Volva's, yeah.
And I think that it's a little subtle difference, but I actually think it's more powerful if you build your army so you have 2 mediums and 2 heavies, because you're going to be maximizing. So the end of turn 3, you will have 5 units, the one that the Blooded joins on turn 1, 2 mediums on turn 2, and then 2 heavy on turn 3. So you'll be at 5 auto, versus most people will have only 3 guaranteed because they'll get 1 per turn. So I think this is actually one of those things that it isn't directly and obviously as powerful, but I think you can bring a lot of other units that are out of your warband in. And I think that actually has way more utility in the long term.
Yes. So one of the downsides to this change, is that you can't do something like have the Blooded come in with Stalkers and then have 3 units of guaranteed Trolls turn 2.
Correct.
Because you can only have, at best, you can only guarantee 2 units now.
Exactly. So it does slow you down tempo on the second turn, but I think you do make it up that you can have a guaranteed tempo each turn. And even on turn 4 and 5, where heavies, if you're a heavy skewed list, this actually in the long term will get stuff on the table a lot more guaranteed, because you'll probably get everything on turn 4 instead of waiting until turn 5.
Yeah.
Which I think has huge advantages, especially where with Nords, you're always going to, most Nords lists run 4 Jotnars or 3 Jotnars. So this will play better into that.
Nice. All right, so next we've got, if your Jarl is the Warlord, you get Surprise Attack, which used to be a negative play experience. If I'm remembering this right, it was -1 to reinforcement rolls for your enemies, which not only can make the game really sour for them because they don't get any of their army in, but it's also easily countered by just bringing the flank special rule.
Correct. Yeah, if someone played around it, they could just bring a lot of flank. And on the other end is, if you win because your opponent misses all the reinforcement, it doesn't feel good. Yeah, it doesn't feel. You don't really strategically 4D chess that. It just happens. And doesn't feel good. The new Surprise Attack is actually very interesting because it kind of adds a little depth to the Nords, in my opinion. So what it does is all friendly infantry regiments on the battlefield, so it doesn't matter the warband, get opportunity special rule, as well as +1 to attack characteristics when performing a clash from flank or rear. So Opportunist does add value. I think it ignores.
Opportunist is it rerolls hit rolls. In addition to if you're attacking from the flank or the rear, they already reroll morale rolls. So double rerolls across the sky. The only thing they're not rerolling is defense.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're in rear and flank, you miss shields, right?
Yes, and you deny them support attacks, and there's a lot of penalties for being in the rear.
So
there's maybe this isn't the time for it, but I'm going to say it. If you have like a T-shaped formation, so 3 in the front and 2 or 1 in the back,
yeah,
and you get engaged from the flank, their units count as engaged to the empty space that you have, but you don't count as engaged in return. So that's like a subtle difference, but a subtle increase in the effectiveness of flank charges even more. Or if you hit the rear, they only have 1 engaged and 3 unengaged, but you have 3 solidly engaged.
Oh yeah, and especially if you can set that up with a Jarl, then you're just throwing so many. You get extra attacks, you get rerolls, you get reroll and resolves. So like if you set. So this changes Nords from a missile of I bring stuff on the table at probably max Jotnars to just throw them at the enemy into a very position-orienting army, which is I want to get Huskars or Valkyries to tar pit, then I want my Raiders
or
Trolls. Oh, Trolls is actually a great tar pit to kind of flank and get the opportunistic charges on the sides and rear. And then at that point, I even think cheap units like Raiders punch way above their station and can be taking out like Dwegum, like Dragon Slayers and stuff, because you're just re-rolling so much stuff that I think you get value. So while Jarls is probably not what I'm going to start with 2.0, I actually think this is a thing I'm going to move into because I think once I get sick of the normal gameplay, this will provide a very different way to bring Nords to the table.
All right, so next up we've got the Coninger. I don't know. You can pronounce it, but it used to give Terrifying 1 on the charge, and it let you take an extra upgrade for the Coninger. And how has it changed?
So the kind of 2 ways it changes. The first one is Conquerors actually can just take 3 treasure troves automatically. So it's not part of, you don't get an extra treasure trove from the Supremacy because you just base get it. So that's a net improvement to the game. The other thing is it gets Terrifying +1. So before it was just you get Terrifying 1. So if you're a Jotnar, you might have Terrifying. You don't gain value. In the new world with 2.0, this increases your Terrifying by 1, which immediately is more impactful because if you're running a Conqueror, you're probably wanting to get access to his high-end Jotnars, like Ice Jotnars.
What else are you taking it for?
Exactly. So I think this will play better into the strength of why you take it.
All right, so next we've got the Shaman's Call the Storm Supremacy ability. It looks like a direct upgrade, so let's go into that.
Yep. So basically before it was if he was on the table, you got to bring 1 model in with Vanguard, which is moved twice. Now it's you can bring up to 2. So immediately double impact. The other stealth upgrade is with reinforcement. I was guaranteeing 1 unit a turn enters. You can use this every time it's available. Previously, you would just roll bad, miss your reinforcement roll, and then you'd lose the chance to use Vanguard. So this is just pure gravy.
Or you'd build a lot of flank and...
Yeah.
But yeah, sounds good. And finally, for the character supremacy abilities, we've got the Volva and the Gift of the Einherjar, which hasn't changed, it looks like.
Nope. Still, if Volva's on the table, everyone gets +1 evasion up to max of E2. So same thing. I do think this one has lost a little bit of value compared to the old edition, just because when we get to characters, there's a few more units in Nord's arsenal that have evasion 2, so there's less targets to improve with this. But otherwise, same ability.
All right, so the first character we're going to look at, like the direct profile we're going to look at, is the Blooded. Right off the bat, I see that he went up 10 points. But what else has changed?
So a few things is I think he was probably one of the better characters, so going up in price makes sense to me. He did get some shift in his abilities. So Clash went down from 4 to 3. Defense went up 1 point to 2. And he also gained a wound, which I think that's fine.
Yeah, and an attack.
He gets an attack, which I think you want to maximize as a Blooded. His barrage went down 1 attack, so from 4 to 3, but he picked up 4-inch range, so to be 16. This feels intentional to make him basically fit with the Stalkers a little bit better. They have about 16-inch range, so it feels like you can now run him and he can just be a support attack with them.
Yeah.
And then if you get charged, then he can cut things up, which is good. He has impact 2, so he functionally hits the base value the same as before. His base attack value was 4. Half of that with impact hits would be 2. The thing is, this doesn't scale with equipment. So you would often give the Roja the Red 2 uploaded to get +2 attacks, which means you would get 3 attacks on it. That doesn't happen. You get static 2, but he still has it. Another nice change with this edition is a lot of the characters get free aspect upgrades, so you can get like +1 attack or +1 clash without paying extra attack. So I think it lets you customize and it's a little more fun. Warband, Mainstay, and Restricted all stay the same. No changes here.
Yep, and having access to the same retinues and masteries does mean... so before you could get him up to Clash 6, so he would get Relentless Blows, but you can't do that anymore because he's only at Clash 3 base. So that's actually a pretty big deal because you could get him like 8 base attacks with Clash 6, and then each one would give you 2 attacks because of Relentless Blows, but that is not a possibility with this character anymore.
Yeah, which feels probably better for the state of the game. It feels weird to have a character get hit and then like your opponent just roll a bazillion dice and you get knocked out. Yeah. So probably better for a game state, but this is still I think the best character Nords have access to.
Okay. All right, our next character is the Jarl from the surprise attack. I see he's gone up 10 points, and what else?
So he used to have a barrage attack, which he does not anymore, so no throwing. He used to have defense 3. He functionally has defense 3 here with defense 2 plus shield, but shield can be evaded if he gets flanked. There's certain abilities that ignore shield, so I actually think this is kind of stealth nerf. He also gets a free selection of an aspect upgrade. He doesn't get Crow anymore because he doesn't have a volley. Other than that, he's the same as he used to be. Same mainstay, same restricted, same retinue and mastery upgrades.
And same stats besides.
Yeah, same stats except for the defense change.
Indirect change. Okay. All right, so moving on to everyone's favorite High King, the Konungr, who has gone up 20 points.
And... for this, he has lost his impact hits, which I actually think is pretty bad because we like the move charge. He did pick up 1 extra wound, which is good. He gets a free aspect, which kind of offsets the point cost a little bit. Doesn't have access to Crow because he doesn't have volley. Other than that, I think there's his mainstays, his restricted, all that stuff is the same. There are 2 big changes with him. Is 1. He automatically gets 3 treasure trove for free. Before, if it was a supremacy, he got 2, so that's great.
Now, by free, you mean you still have to pay points for it.
Correct.
You just don't have to have him be your warlord to get that.
It's just part of the base profile. Yeah. Exactly. You still have to pay for them. And then the second upgrade that you can only have 1 Conqueror. You aren't tied to also recruiting a Jarl. So you could do a blooded Conqueror list if you would want, or a Conqueror Volva or Shaman. So I think that's actually a lot more flexible, and we'll see him get more play with other interesting combos, but it's basically the same unit.
People, I think, did not like that they had to take the Jarl with the Konungr because it wasn't flexible list building. It was, I take this 100-point guy, 150-point unit, and then I also have to take another 100-point guy and like another 120-point unit. And that already eats up like a 4th year list before you do anything else.
Exactly. And since you're already taking those, you're probably just going to lean into the Jotnars because that's what they have. So I think a lot of people end up with the same Nord list because they wanted a Conqueror, so then like it kind of patterns the way you have to go through things. So everyone's looking the same. This will open up list construction. Yeah. Like imagine an Ice Jotnar with Vanguard when paired with Shaman. That seems interesting. Not really something you'd want to do before.
No. March, spellcast.
Yep, there you go.
All right. You heard it here first. New meta. So next we've got the Shaman, the redheaded stepchild of the old Nord list, increasing 20 points. What does he gain for that?
+1 resolve?
Yeah, +1 resolve.
That's the
+1 evasion too.
Oh, didn't even see that. Yes, that's good. I like that.
Yeah, I think his spells got buffed. Well, we might go into spells later. We might skip spells. We might just go over units for right now, but...
Yeah, the thing is with 151, he was given all his spells. It's just Nord spells were all really bad. Now the spells are good. The other huge change, and this is actually where his real change, the stat changes I think are like fine. The big change is the White Waste Shaman was actually folded into the Shaman profile, which I
Oh,
think is
interesting.
good because Shaman looked like he used to only have like two
He had 3 total choices:
Three
Raiders, Ulthidnar, and Berserk, and we won't talk about those 2.
Yeah, because they're not released yet. So he
Yeah.
had one unit you could functionally bring in events, so it wasn't compelling to run him. And White Waste had like only I think 3 or 4 things as well.
White Waste Tribesmen, Mountain Yatnar, and Sea Yatnar.
Exactly.
So they were another giant
another unit
vessel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think by combining them, you make a much more interesting character who has options, so you can run them a few ways. You have another way of bringing Yatnars, specifically Sea Yatnars. So now Conagars can bring Sea Yatnars and Shamans. So if you run a Shaman Conagar list, you can bring up to 4 Sea Yatnars depending how you spend your points, which I think is a compelling reason. So while probably they ran the points with he got 20 because he got 1 extra resolve, 1 evasion, I functionally think that it's going to be important as he's another vessel to max out your Yatnars, especially Sea Yatnars. So I think this guy will see play between better Supremacy and better Recruit list.
Nice.
Boom.
All right. Last character, because White Waste Shaman was taken out, we've got the Volva, who has gone up an eye-watering 35 points.
So functionally, she did go up in points, but now since she doesn't have to pay for spells,
right.
Her Fruit of the Golden Tree used to be 40 points. She used to be base cost 55. So the way I ran her in 151, she cost 95 points because I would get that in the spell.
Okay.
So she actually seen a reduction of 5 points in like real world sense, and she also picked up the rest of her spells for free.
Which means that you can, and this is something that I was really worried about in 151 before I stopped running a block of like 8 to 10 stands or something. You still have the decay spell, and with City States people looking like they want to run huge blocks of hoplites and phalangites, if you don't need to heal, now you can decay the crap out of them.
So there was a game I was playing Dwagam, and I got stuck with I think 6 stands of initiates, and they weren't doing enough where healing was compelling.
Yeah,
having the utility to give that feels very impactful. Yeah. A few other changes to her is most of the characters with priest can't take armor. She has an exception, so she can. So there is an armor to allow her to get smite in duels to ignore defense. That's kind of interesting.
Is she a character you want in duels?
I don't think so, but I guess you could argue that provides a little bit of a pause where if she rolled hot, she could just ignore a character's defense and chump them out. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is an interesting counter to say don't get in combat.
Okay.
She also changed her retinue, so she's got available for combat where she used to have restricted. So I feel there's probably some juice where you can get her to be actually a very combat capable person. I just don't think that's the best use of points with her.
You still want to be casting spells, probably.
That's what it feels like.
Which she was restricted arcane before, and it looks like she is available. And tactics wasn't available at all, and now she's restricted with that. So opens up some options. I think arcane is still what you're gonna go for.
So
obviously.
I think restricted. I think arcane and potentially tactics level 1 to get the ability to reroll 1 resolve, because it's just it's just a nice way to keep you keep the Velks, which you're running her with, on the table a bit longer. That 1 reroll in my last game has every time I rerolled it went from failed to success, which is I granted a small sample set, but when it does save a few extra wounds per game, which adds up. So I think she's roughly the same. She got more spells. I think a good change.
Okay, so character upgrades, items and stuff. Let's just quickly go over. Are there any changed ones that stand out as particularly interesting or good for you?
So I'm excited for Coil of the Serpent, a banner. It gives the regiment the character stand is attached to permanently +1 evasion instead of being a draw event in the old one. I think if you run a Volva plus this, it's kind of interesting because you can make a unit max out at evasion 2. That seems fun.
Oh, okay.
Yarngribber is interesting. We already mentioned this when we were talking about Volva. It gives you the ability to get smite, so you ignore all defenses on a dual action. So I think this is a nice deterrent or a nice way to kind of beat high armor characters in duels. That seems fun. Most of the weapons are the same, except Vanquisher of Monsters, which seems thematically to make more sense with the old Fiend Hunter or rule. Now it gets Linebreaker. I think it probably is a little bit more utility with Linebreaker, but it thematically feels like it should be good for killing monsters.
Yeah, and I can't think of any monsters that this is particularly good versus, because Linebreaker, you remove shield and bastion. I can't think of many monsters that use shield, and I can't think of many monsters that have bastion unless they have a rider, which specifically W'adrhun Rider got nerfed so it doesn't get bastion anymore. I think that the Dwegum one, we'll go into W'adrhun later in maybe this video or a later video, but I have hot takes for that.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just different and weird narrative, but like you said, it doesn't make it, it feels more good in other items. Golden Torque is interesting. This used to be like almost an auto take. It used to get flank. Now it gets Dread. And I think Dread is interesting because preventing your enemy from ever getting inspired action feels like a nice way to make like a Trolls or Valkyrie unit just tarp it. Like, they can't inspire, they don't get charge bonuses. Feels really interesting. The last thing that is kind of weird, and I think we'll see some play, is Herald of the Storms, the arcade equipment. It's a draw event that when you draw this, after it has been resolved, for the rest of the battle phase, no one can do spell actions. So I don't think this is something you'd probably want to take if you go heavy Shamans of Volva. But if you're going like a blooded Konagar list and you're worried about Dwegum, using their spells to break you or doing the flame wall that does damage, activate this early as a draw event and then say, guess what? No one gets spells because I don't get spells. So I think that's kind of interesting, and in certain matchups might see play. It is drastic change of before, which just puts a big wet blanket on everyone's casting ability. They can still do it. It's just harder. This just outright prevents it as a draw action, which is kind of cool.
But it is an arcane item, so you do need to be a priest or a wizard to take it. So no matter what, you are sacrificing your own. Like, you can't give this to a blooded unless you somehow give the blooded a priest.
Oh, you're right.
Or wizard level. So you do sacrifice something in order to do it, but I think the sacrifice in certain matchups is worth it.
Correct. Like, Shaman's ability spells are a lot better, but like I feel like it's cool to take Shaman because you get a free extra move when you enter. So like I could see you taking a Shaman to power your big units up to in the enemy face, and then take this to prevent if they have good spells and attack back. I feel like that's a very valid way to run it, and that's kind of the takedown of the big differences for me, or the standouts,
the interesting ones.
Yeah,
because other items have changed, to be clear, but those are the ones that like are interesting, because we can't spend all night. We can't use all of your time going through every single item, Okay, so Masteries. Same deal with the items. Any interesting ones, preferably not like generic ones?
So the one that I'm most interested, so there's a lot of good stuff here. I think they're fine. They're not super interesting to dig into. There is one that I'm super excited about that you have to build for, which is Wealth of 100 Raids. This gives the new Dauntless keyword, which seemed ridiculous to me. You always count as inspired, so you charge through cover. Who cares? You walk through water, you get it. You can always attack, clash with inspire, and then move. You don't have to spend an action.
With how Nords work too, because of that, you could clash and then charge if they have a screen.
Exactly.
That seems pretty good.
And then if you attach it to a unit with impact hits, you're doing impacts. You're doing double. Yeah, seems great. Oh. The other thing that's great about it is Dauntlets prevents you from ever breaking. So since breaking is now a lot more terrifying because it happens more often. If you get it, you don't get resolve bonuses. A lot of bad stuff happens. It prevents you from that ever happening. You could ignore duels infinitely with this because what do you get? You break? You don't break. It seems really good. It's just something you have to get Tactical Revenue 3. So I don't think you're going to see it a lot, but it seems fun to me. Everything else seems kind of par for course or similar to what we used to have.
All right, spells. Anything interesting here?
Yeah, we're going to go over these quick because I only want to call out a few things that are interesting. Blurred Vision went from 14 inches to 20 inches, which means it'll be more useful to reach out to prevent your attack back. It did pick up scaling, which is a little bit what you're paying for this, but I still think this can see play. Reshape Destiny is pure value now, where before is you could only reroll failed saves of 6. Now you can just reroll all failed saves. So I actually think Reshape Destiny is going to be the spell Shaman are going to be running.
Volva they get all of them.
Yeah,
that's the one they're going to mostly
That's the
cast.
one they're going to be casting. Yeah. Like the other ones, but that I think is going to be a reason to take Shaman now. Like that's cool.
Yeah.
Volva has got some changes and some nerfs. Fruit of the Golden Tree used to heal 2. Now it heals 1 and has a
Per
Jake.
success.
Per success, sorry. So 2 per success used to be smothering to the enemy. I played the Dwarven player. It was not fun for them. So this brings it more in line. You only heal 1 per success. In addition, you can reroll failed moral checks of 6. I feel that is like a very light, like, hey, we're not going to nerf you as bad. But functionally, if you're getting value from this, I don't think you're sequencing heals when you want. Heals feel like something you should do at the end of the round after you've taken a bunch of damage to bring you back up. And if you're taking it late in the round, you probably aren't going to be taking moral checks. So you have nothing to save.
Right. And then the secondary thing is, even if healing is important enough to do at the beginning of the round, the Volva has gone from on average healing like 8 when it's fully tooled out to like fully heal like 5 on average, which
with the new stand heal rule actually hurts because like
it hurts, but also is healing 5 wounds going to save anything? Like if it's desperate enough where it's like, if I want this to survive the round, I need to cast Fruit of the Golden Tree on it. But okay, you're getting 1 stand back.
Yeah.
You're healing a little bit of 1 stand. Like it doesn't seem like you do healing early on, especially if the healing is not enormous.
Yeah. And if you're Valkyrie, which is this probably going to be targeting, are threaded, you're just going to use your Blessed, which they have on profile, to reroll defense. And 1 stand plus rerolling defense is going to be more important than janky. Like, I never want my Velks to take morale checks because I want them to bless the defense and not take any. Right? That's where you want to be. The other thing that's kind of interesting, so Hell's Caress is great because it's decay. I think there's a lot of armies and people who are going to be running big chunks. I think this will see more play.
It
I think
lost
good
scaling.
It lost scaling. That's actually huge. So this is in a meta that is going to take bigger blocks, and it lost scaling. This is going to see play. The scaling is actually huge.
My big block's sad.
Warbringer Light, I feel, is an interesting wombo combo type of thing, which is before Warbringer's Light was useless because it gave the attached unit a regiment blessed. Volva used to be traditionally run with Valkyrie because it's her only mainstay, which have blessed. So before you'd have to seek escort, find someone else. It was janky. It never happened. Now you have a range 10 to pick another unit. It is 3 scaling, and then you can give someone else blessed. I think there's probably worlds where you can reach out and say, I'm not sure if my guys are going to get the attack or get attacked. So I'm going to activate early to stall with Volva. I'm going to give this other unit bless. So if they get charged, they can burn it on defense rerolls so that they can live and then inspire attack back. Or if the opponent goes someplace else, you can use that to get the charge off, burn bless to reroll all attacks, and then do a lot of damage. So I think there's probably value there. It does feel a little fragile.
I'm wary, but
yes. So
you can have it.
You can also upgrade Volva to get Bastion, so you get +1. So, like, I think there's a world where you activate it early, you draw the event.
Oh,
so
most of those effects have been plus the Bastion goes to the regiment. So activating Volva early would not.
Oh, I think the draw event is on her though.
Okay.
It's a mastery just for. And then,
we'll look that up later.
Exactly. Not covering the shaman, White Way shaman, because they don't exist. So they're not released yet. So this might change. Big thing with Ice Jotnar, same spells, same everything. Went from 12-inch range to 8-inch range. So this is just a pure nerf, which everyone agrees Ice Jotnar is needed.
We're moving on to the regiments now, and we're only going to do released regiments, and we're going to try to keep it quick. So we're going to start with the first on the list, Raiders. They've gone up down 10 points from 120 to 110, and they've gone from 40 points per stand to 35 point stands.
For reinforced or additional stands. Yeah, so same there. Same upgrade option, same cost. The stealth improvement here, besides obviously the reduced cost, is with impact hits being per stand, not engaged stand. If you actually run 6 Raiders and you get a charge off, you're going to be getting 12 impact hits, 2 per stand, instead of the front row getting 2 for 6, and then each supporting stand getting 1. So you end up getting 3 extra, which is, I think, a big buff where, as you've been speaking the value of, you can definitely move charge with a big block of these guys and hit damage. So I think these just are even better.
Yeah, and that plus if they take any damage moving across the field, they get +1 attack for the inevitable clash.
Yeah.
So with a 6 block, you can actually get effective use of Blood of the Einherjar and eventually get Flurry, well, in their case, +2 attacks per stand.
Yeah.
So you'd be looking at a total of 6 attacks per stand with Flurry.
Yeah.
And still doing 2 impact hits. So that's pretty nice.
Yep, and you also shore up their bad resolve with the big block.
That's true. All right, so next is Bow Chosen. They have gone down 20 points, 10 points per stand. What else has changed?
This is probably, I think, the most changed unit for Nords. So I'm going to start with the most impactful. There used to be Barrage 8 per stand, so 2 per model. Now it's Barrage 5. So they went down 3 Barrage per stand. They used to be 24-inch range. Now they're 16. And I actually think
that's huge.
That is why they're not going to be seeing as much play as they used to, just because with 24-inch range, you can get hits very early and often. With 16, I think they're not going to be able to reach out as far and impact the game. They did go up volley from 2 to 3, which I think will help a little bit. And their base evasion went from evasion 1 to evasion 2.
Evasion 0 to evasion 2.
Evasion. Yeah. So I think
you just thought they had evasion 1 because you run Volva.
Correct. The way I used to shore up for their lack of evasion was I would run Volva with their Supremacy to give them evasion 1 natively. So I would kind of cover that weakness. Now they've just given it E2, but you don't get any synergy with Volva anymore. So I do think this makes them less dominant. You're not going to see giant chunks of these like you're currently seeing.
9 stands in one army.
Yeah, exactly. Also, the change to how range attacks, where the back rows, like you have to have 1 long stand and stuff. So I think you're going to see minimum size units of these, if that.
Yeah. Did you go over the wounds?
Oh, the wounds. Yeah, they used to be 2 wounds each, and now they're just like Barrage. They went from 8 wounds per stand, 2 per model, down to 5. So, once again, big impact. Because one of the slight weird things about Bow Chosen is they can kind of melee. So unlike something like Stalkers or Militia Bowmen in 100 Kingdoms is, if Bow Chosen get charged by a flanking unit like hunting parties, they don't fold. Losing 3 wounds actually makes them a lot more killable. So I actually think that's going to impact how they play on the table.
Yeah. Next we have Stalkers. They've gone down 5 points for the base unit from 165 to 160, and they've gone down 5 points per stand.
So they still maintain flank and Vanguard, which they used to have and was their coolest ability. The big change to them is they went from 20 range to 16. They went from 4 barrage per stand to 3. It's a slight nerf, but I think across the board they're trying to bring ranged in a little bit. So this just seems to be on par with what happened to every other range unit across the faction. So these, I think, are going to be functionally the same in-game.
Yeah. Okay. Next on the list, Huskarls. They've not changed in base points for the regiment, but they have gone down 5 points per stand.
They are functionally the same ability-wise, yet once again, they went from throwing weapons, which have their attacks, to just base impact 2. Base impact 2, like when we talk about with Raider, is better because each stand fully contributes, not just the engaged stand. So extra stands got cheaper. Having more of them makes impact better. I think this is a buff for them.
All right, so moving on to Trolls. I see that a lot has changed, starting with their points from 210 to 175. Very drastic 35-point reduction. And then they're also 15 less points per stand, which also drastic. What's the deal with that?
So there's a few changes here, some directly on the profile and then some based on the new rules with 2.0. So they do lose 2 wounds per stand. They went from 8 to 6 per stand. So that's a little bit less there. They do pick up 1 extra attack, which is nice. Cleave 1 instead of Cleave 2. I think that is impact. Cleave 2 is what you want, I feel, to break things. I think the biggest change, though, is they are still regen 5 for the draw event, but with the change where you have to heal more than half the wound value, you will need 4 wounds going in to bring a stand half back. So if I heal 2 wounds...
Well, so you will heal those 4 wounds fully back.
Correct.
It's just you can't bring a stand back unless you will heal 4
Unless
wounds.
you have 4.
Yeah.
So if I have a stand back with 4 wounds on it, so I use 2 of my regen 5 to bring that up to 6.
Yep.
I don't have enough to bring half my next, and that just evaporates. So I think that you're going to see a lot less value with regeneration because you're going to need to ensure you have a full 4 to bring half a stand back.
Yeah.
So I don't functionally know if this is. I think this might scrum out with the reduced cost. Like I think it might even out. But there is enough nerfs on the profile to make the point reduction valid. So I think this nets out, which is they're probably what you're paying for them.
Yep, and you also mentioned this. I just wanted to reiterate this.
Yeah.
When we talked about Blood of the Einherjar, since it's not a draw event anymore,
Correct.
trolls can actually benefit from the +1 attack to it, so you can be looking at 6 attacks per stand, which and still gaining the regeneration, which is also a thing.
Correct, yeah, and that's actually hugely impactful because before when I ran troll heavy list, I would just never get blood ability because why would you take it when you can regenerate? You always pick regen because you want to stick around.
Exactly.
Here you don't have to make that choice. So yeah, once again with the lower cost, a little bit more cohesion and utility with the army-wide rules. I think it's good changes, but I do think the point cost is correlated with a less powerful unit. So I think it makes sense.
All right. Valkyries are next. They are 150 points, just like they used to be. They have gone down 5 points per stand from 50 to 45, and their standard bearer has gone from 20 to 15.
Everything else is exactly the same. None of those things had any rule changes in the 2.0. This unit just got slightly cheaper.
Hooray!
Value. Pure value.
All right, Fenrir Beast Packs. Fenrir. They've gone down 10 points. They are the same points per stand.
I am going to say something potentially controversial. I think Fenrir were not good in the old edition. I could never get them in combat. I think they were slightly overcosted and a little slow compared to other flanking units. And in the old edition, they had impact hits. So when they hit, you could move charge to actually be able to reach out 14 inches with a die roll. So, average of 17 or something.
Yep.
Now they lose impact hits, so you can't even move and charge with them.
Uh.
So I think this is a unit that just doesn't have a place anymore. Maybe you'll find weird stuff with a very flanky Jarl list, but I just don't see it.
They don't even, because Jarl only affects infantry.
Yeah, well,
and their cavalry.
Yeah.
So
they get opportunities.
Oh, they do.
So literally, it's just like if you're playing some weird list where you're building your entire strategy about baiting things to expose things, maybe you'll see value. Yeah. But I would rather just take Ugars or something with impact hits or Huskarls. I think it's better. Oh, do you know what's great? Raiders with a shield biter have functional charge of 7, have impact hits, and I would rather just move charge with that.
I mean, you do lose 2 total inches from that because your move is actually only 5. But you're right. Yeah. Functionally, and those are mainstay and roughly the same price.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, moving on then. Okay, now we have Ugars. Not ogres, Ugars, who have gone from 165 to 150 and not changed their per stand point.
Yep, so you get a few things over the old rules. So they get 1 extra wound per stand. I think that's value.
Yeah.
Resolve 2 went up to Resolve 3. Ooh. I actually think this is very important because I used to not like Ugars because Oblivious lets you fail 2 checks. You basically take half as many Resolve. But with Resolve 2, you're failing so many that enough damage trickles through that it's not impactful. Yeah. With Resolve of 3 plus Oblivious, I actually think they're a lot more defensive. I think they're also... this didn't change on their profile, but now they're the only non-Jotnar with Cleave 2 in Nords. So I actually think they'll see
that are released. Before we get a million comments saying Bear Sharks are right there on screen.
That you can run an event in the next 3 to 6 months before the next Nord. So exactly. So I think that makes them better. The other thing that people might think is weird, they no longer allow the option for standard bearer. I actually think this is good because as a new player who buys the kit, there was no standard bearer part. You had to come up with a weird conversion or something, which is good, but I do think increases the barrier of entry for a new player. I think you should make the profile match what's in the box. This does that. I think that's actually better for new players. So I actually like a lot of the changes here. I think Ugars are a lot more interesting now.
All right, we're in the final stretch. We've only got the Jotnars left to do, and we're going to start with the Sea Jotnar, who has gone up from 190 to 250 points, a 60-point increase. Is it worth it?
I don't know if he's worth it. I've only run him once. He did feel undercosted at 190. He does
Okay.
pick up some things for that cost increase. He gets 2 additional attacks. He was 10 in the old edition, 12 now. He picks up 2 additional wounds, so from 12 to 14. I actually
Okay.
think
That's
that was
big.
that was impactful when I was playing versus the Dragon player. I think this would 2 extra wounds would have kept my guy on the table. He also natively picks up evasion 2, so he gets +1 evasion. I was covering for that because I ran a Sea Jotnar with a Volva, so I functionally was running this. Barrage, he lost strong arm, but the way range works, it's still the same.
Yeah.
I think the big change here is with the wording of his free additional volley action, he still can only do 1 volley action a turn, where before you could double volley.
Yep.
Is it worth 250? We'll see, but I think at 190 he was undercosted, so I think this
That's
is
fair.
probably a good change.
All right, second of the 3 Jotnars, we have the Mountain Jotnar, who went from 180 points to 170 points, a 10-point loss. Did they lose anything for this benefit?
They're basically the same. I think they went down because they were run less than other ones because, like we talked about with the Sea Jotnar, for 10 points more, you got a lot of value. I think Mountain Jotnars for 170 will see a lot of play because you kind of need Jotnars. I think that all the Jotnars should be rebalanced a little bit. I would love to see Ice Jotnars lose Unstoppable and that go on Mountain Jotnars. So the Sea Jotnar is the Jotnar who can do ranged attacks and hunt big fiends. Ice Jotnars are the spellcaster tricky ones, and Mountain Jotnars are the melee focus one. And if they would pick up Unstoppable, that would fit the meta. I don't think it will happen. And for their points, I think Mountain Jotnars are still going to see play. They fit too valuable of a role within the Nord army.
Final unit for the Nords. We've made it through the entire list of released models. We have the Ice Jotnar. It has gone up 15 points from 240 to 265. What did it gain?
It gained all the spells without paying a cost, which I think
Which
has
it
some
already
value.
had to pay for spells, minimum of what, 15, 10?
Yeah, so
10,
I think
10 points.
Yeah, so I think functionally this is this. There's no
Okay.
change to this because you get the spells included in the cost.
Fair.
And then the only change is a very weird one. Is they went from wizard to priest.
Wizard 4 to Priest 5.
Yes, you're more likely to cast stuff. The other value with priest is if you target a devout model, you get an auto success. So if you're casting Rhymestorm into a devout model, you get 2 hits for free. Good job, Ice Jotnar.
Wow.
Yeah, weird change. I don't think it was needed. Getting an extra cast dice is great, but you're still going to see them. Ice Jotnars are the best Jotnars. They're functionally the same. We're now going to jump into the W'adrhun army list. The first thing we're going to cover is the new army-wide rule for Hymns of the Brave. What does it do?
So, Hymns of the Brave, it's completely new. This did not exist in the previous list at all. Basically, when a character stand kills an enemy character during a duel action, the regiment that you're in gains the Fanatic Special Rule. And the Fanatic Special Rule is also sort of an army ability. I'll just go over it now. It has also drastically changed. Before, the way that it would work is when you do chants, which we'll get into, it gave you +1 chant token. So it would give you a higher grade of buff. What it does now is it gives you +1 chant token and also enables a higher tier of chant, which technically before you could only get this highest tier of chant by spending the extra token. But because now that highest tier of chant costs the same amount as the second tier of chant, it effectively means that you can do a 3 token chant with 2 tokens if you're a fanatic. Whereas before you still needed 3 tokens and fanatic to do it, but it's basically reduced the token cost by 1.
So I'm going to ask just one question with Hymns of the Battle, because to me this feels a little situational.
It's incredibly situational.
In your
Thank you for
experience
asking.
of playing W'adrhun, how many times do you think you would have procced Hymn of the Brave?
Just zero times. I would have never procced Hymns of the Brave. Duels don't usually happen at in order to proc Hymn of the Brave, it feels like I would have to contrive such a specific situation and gank out an enemy caster or something but then at that point I'm sacrificing priority because I'm dueling early in the round most likely. And then I have to duel early in the round or maybe middle of the round.
Yeah.
And then I have to be in a situation where I can duel, but my regiment doesn't want to act first.
Yeah.
So I have to be engaged with an enemy regiment at the beginning of the round. I have to then duel, kill an enemy character, and then my regiment later acts in the round with the fanatic buff. But no matter what, in that situation, if I'm engaged with an enemy regiment that I need a buff to kill, they are going to activate unless my opponent is weird or I have some way of stopping it, like with another threat across the board that's more important. But like my character duels, then they could just activate their regiment and attack my regiment. And now, like, are they going to wipe me out? Is my chant buff going to be enough with my depleted regiment to go through? So it seems like a very weird, very niche ability that is like, it's 1 in a million games it'll matter.
Yeah, it feels cool when it comes up, but it feels to me like Indiana Jones, I think the second or third movie, where I'm putting all these careful like crystal lenses and the sun at the right time of year in the right position will show me the map to fanaticism.
Exactly.
And if you have a bad matchup where there's a melee capable character to duel, you don't want to do it because you might die. And if it's someone who is not melee capable, they can just defer, because if you're going to kill them anyway, you're going to break. So there really is no downside to saying no, because if you die, you're broken. If you don't take the duel, you're broken. So feels very situational, but
it's a very casual ability, I feel, because a casual player won't care about the stack order so much, and they are going to like duel in the middle of the round and then purposefully set it up to so casual ability for casual nerds, not us competitive tournament boys.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is kind of the core W'adrhun ability, which is Chants. This table looks pretty complex. Can you break it down and explain what Chants do?
Yeah, so they streamlined it a little. They've changed every chant effect, but actually, let me step back. Let me start at the beginning. Chants. Prime army mechanic. Most of your units are tied to a cult. Every time you draw a card from your stack that has a cult, you add a token of the associated cult to a stack. When you have 2 or more tokens on your stack, the next time when you draw a card, and this is after you add the token. Then, if you have 2 or more, you can then chant. If you chant, you discard 2 or more tokens and gain an effect on the table that we're looking at on the screen right there. So if you discard 2 famine tokens, you get the tier 1 bonus, which is +2 to charge distance in the shock special rule. Conquests can act as a wild card, so if you add a conquest token to the sequence, when you spend it, you can spend it as any other token. But in order to chant Conquest, you need to spend more than one type of token. So
you need 1 war and 1 conquest to access to war.
Yes.
Okay.
Or you if you have 1 death and 1 war, you can do 1 tier 1 conquest.
Okay.
So that's the gist of it. So basically every 3 to 4 cards you are going to be flipping, and you're going to be gaining some effect depending on how you have your stack ordered.
And in the previous edition, you had to have the model on the table to do chants. Is that still the way it is?
So the way that it previously worked was you needed the model on the table to add a token. Now the way it works is the model needs to have been on the table at the beginning of the round to add a token. So before turn 1, I could have a unit of Raptor Riders with a Predator character embedded in it. Have the Raptor Riders walk onto the board, and then when I flipped the Predator card, I would gain a token associated with his cult. That is no longer the case, because neither the Raptor Riders nor the Predator started on the battlefield at the beginning of that round. They can't add tokens, but they can still chant. Okay. You can chant from off table if you have tokens.
so later units can enter with one of the abilities for greater move distance. Like you could have someone march with a +3 from level 1 Conquest if you had other models on the table generating the chant tokens.
Correct.
So I will ask you what of these are impactful to which one do you use most, because I think that'll give some context to the table. But to me, glancing over this, there's a lot of really great abilities that you can pick up with this, but based on what you explained and my practice playing against W'adrhun, feels a little bit like a Rube Goldberg machine where you kind of get a few things to click perfect to really get the benefit.
Yes, so you have to work around the chants to get any benefit from them, and they have actually made it harder to gain benefits from chants because, like almost every other effect in the game, now chants drop off at the end of the round, where they used to exist until the next activation of that unit. So you can see that Conquest Tier 2 gives you +2 to your evasion characteristic to a maximum of 3. Previously, it only gave you +1 activation, but when you activated the unit and you did that chant, you would have +1 evasion until the next time that specific unit activated. So if it was your first unit activated in one round and did that chant and then was the last unit the next round, it would have +1 evasion throughout all of that. But now it ends at the end of the turn.
And it also feels like previously you could see, if you had more activations than your opponent, you could just be like, I'm going to stall a lot in the beginning, and then the last 3 cards are going to be three units I care about. Chant. Third one will use it to get +2 evasion. Yeah. And now I fully know this one unit will be wherever it is, fully protected for the whole entire.
No more. So the defensive buffs have, in my opinion, lost a huge amount of value. War 1, War 2, they both give like defensive buffs. The War 1 removes broken status for free, which is good. It used to be a choice. You either remove broken or you gain bastion. So now it gives you +1 defense and immediately removes broken. So it gives you both. That's good.
This feels like something you could use instead of reforming at the beginning of the turn to pop a unit
rallying.
Back. Instead of rallying. So you could say, this is a broken unit I'm worried about losing because it's in a dangerous spot. Instead of wasting an action to rally, I'm going to chant this, auto rally, get +1 defense so that they're a little bit better suited because they're already in a bad spot, and then still get an inspire attack. But yeah, once again, I feel like
it saves action economy a little bit.
Once again, you have to have a unit that's hurt, that's broken, that's in a precarious position that you need to and then you need to have this limited resource.
Yes, exactly. You need to have basically ended your round with enough tokens to perform this chant. Other things that have changed. So famine. So I'm going to say because defensive bonuses have look worse to me, because I don't like giving priority away to gain defensive bonuses, because most of the time I need that priority to perform offense. Death is the number one chant. It was the number one chant, remains the number one chant. +1 to clash characteristic is always useful.
Yeah.
If you have impact hits, it affects those. If it just clash bonus is good. Flawless strikes on 1s to hit, you ignore defenses.
That's
very powerful. I probably wouldn't go up to Fanatic on them, so just going to leave that out. Famine, +2 to charge distance and shock, so you inspire twice. That's good. +2 to charge distance is good, but because of the setup required, is not always something that you can really pull off because it requires priority. If the enemy charges you first, you do not gain the benefit from shock or the charge distance. So you're most likely going to get more benefit from death in a lot of situations where you get charged first. Conquest? Go ahead.
I was going to say, granted, I don't get shock from my shield biter, but I pay 15 points for the +2 charge, and which is a great. I would do that every day.
Yeah,
spending 2 activations to set something up just makes it a little harder to count.
Yeah, Conquest was pretty severely nerfed. It used to be +3 to march characteristic when performing any march action. So if you marched, you would gain a total of 6 inches. Now it only does it on your first march action. So you can only possibly gain 3 inches. It used to give +1 evasion until your next activation. Now it gives you +2 evasion until the end of the round. So I could see this advancing to like the center of the board early on. So with a faster unit, so you get the +3 inch move with the first march. You're probably going to march. You get +2 evasion, and you can kind of weather some additional attacks. Cool. The tier 3 with Fanatic. This is one that I used to go for all the time. It lets you do a third action. It also used to add a Conquest token to your stack when it was done. So
it helped roll over to... That's where it's good, because then you chain events. So now...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now you can't do that anymore. Don't get me wrong. 3 actions, still very good. I'm already looking at putting this in a Hunter unit, giving them Fanatic, and then doing a volley clash charge. Volley charge clash, so that I get 3 different attacks, because you can give them an artifact that gives them 2 impact.
Oh, that's so good. Okay.
So you get 3 attack activations, and you can stack up damage with that. That's still good, and only needing 2 tokens to do so, also pretty cool. So that is the Chant mechanic and its myriad of changes in a nutshell. That's probably the majority of the video. I'm kidding.
Now we're done with Chant. We're jumping straight into W'adrhun Supremacy ability. Matriarch Queen, you run her before. What's she do with her Supremacy?
So her Supremacy ability before used to be, while she was on the battlefield, you could re-roll 1 reinforcement roll. Obviously, that's not so great when you have guaranteed things anymore, so they have completely changed it. They've given her a draw event, which lets her make a non-monster regiment a Fanatic unit until the end of the round. Now, this does mean that you are sacrificing priority, which I've already talked about. I don't like doing that. You do have to kind of set this up very galaxy brain in order to make it work out. But what it does mean, if you're activating her first already to give another unit Fanatic, that means you're adding a token to the sequence. Then the Fanatic unit activates, they add a second token to the sequence. So there, in those 2 activations, you have now activated the highest tier of whatever chant. That's good, but you have to be in a position where you can sacrifice an entire activation
Of the
and if you lose priority, like they get to activate, then you activate your Matriarch Queen, then they get to activate something else, and it's risky. This is the Hunter unit that I was just talking about earlier, involves a Matriarch Queen Warlord using the Supremacy ability to give a Fanatic.
So next up, let's talk about the Chieftain and Shock Assault.
All right. It gives all friendly regiments in the army the Shock Special rule. If they already have the Shock Special rule, they gain Flurry. So it used to give all regiments in its warband Shock.
Okay.
And that is, when you charge, you inspire twice. The addition of Flurry is interesting.
Does this combo with the chant that gives shock? So you could
it's
chant
supposed
to
to
get that, then do this, so you can basically guarantee a shock with Flurry? Because that feels like...
So this is always active. Now, there's a problem with that. So this is getting into the nitty gritty of red as worded. But because this basically happens first,
okay.
There is no unit that has the Shock Special rule in the army. So there is no way that you can have the Shock Special rule and then gain it from the Supremacy ability.
Okay.
You can only gain Shock after the Special rule. So it's weird, but I'm 99% sure that the intent is that if you chant Famine, you get Flurry instead of Shock.
Okay.
It's interesting. It's way more interesting than it used to be. Having an entire army with Shock, potentially unlocking Flurry with Famine means that you can do quite a bit of stuff. A lot of our army is locked behind Clash 2, so anything to improve that Clash. Plus, even if you don't go for Flurry, this stacks with Death 1, so you can get +1 Clash and Shock. So you can bring a Clash 2 to Clash 3 with Death, and then with Shock, you go to Clash 4, you inspire again, you're re-rolling 6s.
Yes.
If you do Death 2, you've got Flawless Strikes, so you smite on 1s. So those 6s might re-roll into 1s. There's some potential. But yeah, that's Chieftain. He's much more interesting than he used to be. Can't wait for him to be released next month.
Predator and the Mounted Predator are the next with Thrill the Kill. Can you explain how this works?
Yes, although it has not changed. And neither has Scion of Conquests. So,
Oh, okay.
Since we're talking about changes, I think that we can just move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. So now we're moving on to the characters and actually talking about their profiles. So the Matriarch Queen is the first one up. Points look the same. Has anything changed?
Yep. So she has gained +1 to movement. She has gained +1 to attack. She has gained +1 to wound. She has gained +1 to resolve. Now, she's lost a couple things. Inspiring Presence used to make it so that the regiment can never be broken. What it instead gives is bravery now.
Oh.
So that is a pretty big change. Her Supremacy ability is a draw event. She also has a draw event she was quite popular for before, which gave heal 3 before. It now gives heal 4. But now we're running into the Nord problem that you were talking about.
In the old edition.
In the old edition, where they had competing draw events in a lot of cases. Oops. So you do have to make a choice. Am I going to activate at the beginning of the round to give a unit Fanatic if she's your Warlord? You have to choose activate beginning of the round to give Fanatic, or activate at the end of the round to have useful healing. Or I guess you can heal at the beginning of the round if you're in a position where it makes sense to do so. The other thing that she's gained is she's traded Chosen of Conquest in her restricted section for Raptor Riders. The key thing that this means is that you can use your Brood of Umgora model, the Founders Exclusive Limited Edition, which was advertised as being able to represent a Matriarch Queen taking this item called the Brood of Umgora, which makes them a mounted unit. You can now actually legally take a Matriarch Queen using that model.
Oh,
because
cool.
she has a unit that she can join. She didn't have that before. She did not have any cavalry units to join, so it was not actually legal. She also lost Bound from her warband, which used to be a mainstay for pretty much every character, except for Sign of Conquest. That unit has been completely removed from the game.
Okay.
So everyone lost that. Spoiler alert, everyone lost that. Those are all of her changes.
It might not be super, compelling, but I do think it's interesting that the model they sold now can actually be run as intended. So I do think that's
as
net
advertised.
win.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the extra stats seem good, but it seems weird that you have to now play which draw event am I going to take?
Yeah.
Next up is a Sign of Conquest, now at 100 points, up 10 from 90. What did this model get for that cost?
So, like every spellcaster, he's got every single spell that he knows. He went from Priest 3 to Priest 4, and as someone who failed a lot of spells before, because Priest 3 is not very good, Priest 4 would have been good if the spellcasting had not gone up to base 2 successes. That barely, if it even, compensates for it. Otherwise, it got the normal W'adrhun character stat increases, the movement up to 6, the attacks up to 5, the wounds up to 5. Nothing else has really changed. Spells didn't change. Warbands didn't change except for losing Blooded.
You mean Bounded?
Bound, sorry.
Yeah.
Bound. Which I said earlier that I didn't think that they had them in the first place, but they do. They did before, but they're gone. So, yeah, no big changes here. Nothing wild.
Next, we're going to talk about his Chieftain, following the trend. Went up points from 95 to 100, so 5-point increase. What's up with the Chieftain?
So he gained 1 wound, 1 move. He gained free Way of War. Before he had access to Fury, Bellowing Shout, which added a Conquest token to the sequence, and Seize the Day. Now he has, for free, Bellowing Shout or Double Time, which allows the unit he's in to march 3 times during an activation.
Good.
Nothing else has changed. Lost Bound.
Good for the first turn, Double Time, get you on the table. That seems good.
No, because Double Time used to let you march from off table 3 times, but it doesn't anymore.
So we're now on to the Predator. 90 points currently. What changed with this model?
So they were 85 points before, so they went up a little. They lost 6 inches of range on their barrage attack. So they didn't lose they didn't lose quantity, but they did lose range.
Par for course, though. Like everyone used a little bit,
yes.
so I say on par with everything.
Yep. They gained 1 attack, 1 wound. They've got 1 evasion, which is interesting. And then they get a free Way of the Hunt. Ignore terrain for obscuration and or fire and slash or. No, it's actually just or. So you can ignore terrain or you can get fire in advance.
Okay.
They also gained Quattle, which is an unreleased model to their warband.
Yeah, once it's released, it'll be impactful, but
Right now it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Next up, we are at the artifacts. As per Nords, we're going to kind of just give the most interesting ones or the most changed. So, what artifacts are interesting with the update?
All right, so with the update, Scars of Endikar, it used to give the character stand +1 evasion or something like that. Yeah, just the character to a maximum of 3. Now it gives the entire regiment that they're joining +1. And that's pretty big.
And the maximum of 3 seems good. 50%
Yes.
just ignore. That feels fun.
You could theoretically put this on... Actually, you can't because mounted characters can't. Never mind. There's some units that you can get benefit from this on, but yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to figure out exactly how to use it, but I don't 100% know. The other interesting thing that changed is you've got the Kiss of the Dilosaur, which just went down in points. It lets you reroll injury rolls, and it lets you reroll enemy defense rolls. So when you're making defense rolls, you reroll.
Good defensive artifact.
Oh, yeah. Primordial Splinter. It changed from I should have looked at this beforehand, but yes. You used to add 1 dice and ignore enemy interference, but now it just gives you plus to your priest rule directly, equal to the number of chant markers in the sequence. Now, most of the time, this is probably going to mean that you get +1. You get your Scion of Conquest's own
buff. Yeah, or own chant.
Own thing. But when you're dealing with Priest 4 and you need at least 2 successes, +1 can be super helpful.
Yeah.
Also, in the same vein, Sacred Censor used to just count you as a priest for the purposes of interference. But now it straight up gives you Priest +1, which means that you could take it and basically get the same effect as the 20-point Primordial Splinter, but for 5 points.
I was going to say, Sacred Censor seems a lot more like just practical for 15 points. I do see there's probably a world where you really need a spell to go off, and you'll
build
set
up
the
chant,
end of your last turn to chant and then activate, or set it up.
Yes.
And it does give you that flexibility.
And now, one of the spells is to turn off draw events, so you could set that up so that you start the next turn with 3 tokens, so you get +3 dice.
That would be good against... Okay, yes. I can see the value. Like trolls. Yeah, exactly. Like, you could be like, I'm going to set things up because I don't want to deal with him healing himself. I'll make it work.
Yep. Other than that, items haven't changed too much, honestly, so those are the ones that stand out to me.
With the changes in 2.0, do you care about the changes to Masteries?
Not really. W'adrhun Masteries in 2.0 are, in this current version of the army list, are not super interesting. The ones that were interesting before are still interesting, and by that I mean loyalty. Not as interesting as before, because it just adjusts your reinforcement rolls. Wasteland Adder gives you flank, also not as interesting because you have inherent flank.
Yeah.
Apex Master is interesting because it lets you ride a dinosaur. One voice, when you spellcast, add a number to the spellcasting roll equal to the number of chant markers in the sequence. Before, you had to actually discard the chant markers in order to gain the benefit. Never mind, you didn't have to discard. I just looked at it live. I'm so much less professional than Brandon is in these recordings. But anyways, I'm not interested in these masteries.
I was going to say, this also feels worse than the item upgrade we just talked about for 20, because one voice you don't discard, but the way I think the item read is you discarded to get the plus to priest, right?
No. None of them involve discarding.
Okay.
Maybe none of them do. So
okay, so this another 20-point way to get better. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
This or Dauntless?
Yes.
Yeah, Dauntless seems way more interesting to build around.
Looking at other armies' masteries, the W'adrhun list seems really trimmed and just honestly uninspired.
Moving on to the next section, we're going to talk about W'adrhun spells. One thing I noticed, there's not a lot of them. So what's changed?
Just 3.
What's changed with them?
So nothing, except for dissonance. Dissonance used to be you cast the spell, and then later when the enemy spellcaster tried to cast a spell, you could discard tokens from your chant pool and remove a number of dice from their spellcasting pool. Now it's just straight up. If they attempt to cast a spell well within 12 inches of you, you discard 2 tokens and the spell is completely negated. It's like effectively a counter spell, which is interesting, especially since you don't have to pay points to get it. It's something that you have to do early in the round, and you have to have enough markers to actually spend to negate all your enemy spells. Probably more useful if the enemy list only has 1, maybe 2 spellcasters. But if they have a lot of spells going on, you're not going to get big value out of this, I don't think.
This feels useful versus Dweghom because they have the spell that breaks
Yes.
units, and they don't have a ton of ways of doing. Like, they don't run a ton of spellcasters in my playing against them. So this and with breaking being way worse, this feels like a nice counter to, like, exactly like you said, factions that usually just bring around one spell cast that has big impact. But, like, I wouldn't build around this to stop Rhymestorm. Like, cool, I take a few hits. But, like, breaking a 6-stand unit, that feels bad.
Right. So, yeah, it's got niche uses. It's cool that you get all 3 spells for free.
Now we're on to the meat of the changes, which is Let's Talk Braves, a mainstay unit for the W'adrhun. What's changed with them?
They pay 5 points more for their standard bearer, and they've gained 1 wound, which most of the W'adrhun roster has. Full stop. That's it. That's the change.
Now we're on to the next unit of regiments. Can you explain Blooded, the other mainstay staple?
Yes. So they've gone up 20 points and gained 2 attacks and 1 wound for their troubles. They have also gone up 5 points per stand. They have lost Flurry, which means that they can reroll attacks. Now with Clash 2, they're not hitting very much unless you stack Chance on them or take a Shaman Warlord and get Shock on them. So overall, as somebody who is known as #1 Blooded Enjoyer on the official Conquest Discords, that's me, if you're wondering. Very disappointing to find out that at baseline, they've lost a huge amount of damage potential. And, they've lost damage, like, average, but they've gained potential. And when you stack them up with buffs, they do good, but, like, I don't know. Are you stacking buffs on them anymore? Like,
it feels like you're paying 20 points for 2 extra attack over Braves and a few more options with command upgrades, which I don't know if they're interesting. I think that's a question you have to ask when you build the armies at work. Though.
So the Aberration is an interesting one because the Aberration gives you Lethal Demise. And Lethal Demise has changed in 2.0 so that you can heal from Lethal Demise. In 151, you could not heal a unit that had Lethal Demise. So now you can have this unit screen, take damage from an enemy unit attacking it, have the Matriarch Queen heal it up, which is a pretty cool thing. The other thing is Tracker gives flank, which it used to do, but it also gives Fiend Hunter, which can also be, like, if you're fighting the right target, brutes or monsters. Brutes is a pickup in 2.0. It used to just be monsters, but that can give you your flurry back.
That feels really good.
Yeah.
And the fact that most armies have a brute or a monster that gets pretty consistent play.
Unless you're 100 Kingdoms, in which case you have none of those.
But City State, Old Dominion, Nord,
W'adrhun,
Spires. Spires has a lot. Like,
literally everyone except for 100 Kingdoms. Yeah. So that's Blooded, my favorite unit. It's gonna probably be a screen. My list has gone from 22 stands to probably 6 to 9 stands. So that's me, #1 Blooded Enjoyer in the United States.
So it went from like a blooded lover to a blooded okayer.
Yeah.
Up next is Veteran, a unit that's going to be released, I think, in the next month.
Yeah.
What's going on with it?
So, quite a few changes, actually. Probably one of the more changed units in the W'adrhun list. It's gained 1 attack, which was much needed. Its problem before was it didn't have much damage output. What it did have was 2 wounds per model, which means that it was 8 wounds per stand. Now, it is only 6 wounds per stand, but that's still tankier than average.
Yeah.
It's gone down 35 points. It's gone down 5 points per stand. It has lost the tribe shaman option, which would give the unit aura of death, which was what I was most excited about. So I'm kind of bummed that we're losing that. It used to be able to take 2 officers, so you could take the chief and the champion. Champion giving the stand +1 attack, chief giving the stand, or chief giving flurry, champion giving +1 attack to the unit.
Yeah, it feels like if you want them to go big in damage, you'd want both. So now you have to make the choice. And as we talked, I think on average +1 attack is usually better than flurry.
Well, with Clash 3, flurry is probably better.
Yeah, okay.
And especially because they have Forged in Battle, so you can give a tier 1 chant to them without spending a token, which combos later into the turn, so you can activate the veterans, get the benefit of a chant, but still have the tokens for the next unit. So that's a cool trick that W'adrhun can pull. So you can be a death cult. You can chant tier 1 death using Forged in Battle. Bring yourself up to Clash 4, charge, inspire, rerolling 6s. Oh, well, in that case, the flurry doesn't matter as much because you're only newly rerolling 5. So in that case, you're right. You beat me. +1 attack is better in this case. Okay, moving on.
Moving on to the first ranged regiment of the W'adrhun. Hunters at 115 points currently. What's changed with them?
So 1 wound like most other W'adrhun units. Interestingly, 1 attack, which does make them a little bit more of a mixed unit because they have higher than average attack and they also have a ranged attack. So, you can do interesting stuff with them. Their ranged profile hasn't actually changed at all. Unlike most ranged units in the game, they have gained access to a new unit upgrade called the Flint Napper, which lets them ignore Hardened, which means that their AP is always in effect. Dwegum Dragon Slayers with Hardened 1, they are still taking -1 to their defense 3. That's a pretty cool thing. It also lets them reroll 6s to hit with volley attacks. Now you can pick that, which is a generally overall useful buff. Or you can take the tracker, which gives you Fiend Hunter, which means all those deadly shot, armor-piercing 1 barrage attacks that you're making, which, by the way, their barrage has not gone down per stand. They're still at barrage 4 per stand, which I think is to represent that they used to have strong arm, where they were making full attacks at max range. But yeah, Fiend Hunter and Flank for 15 points is a pretty cool thing to have when you have deadly shot.
Especially since Fiend Hunter now hits brutes as well as monsters.
Exactly. So I can slaughter all kinds of stuff with this. So interesting. Only went up 10 points. Gained interesting new options with Flint Napper and improved tracker. So
with the increased attacks and the fact every other ranged unit has gotten worse and this stayed the same, this kind of actually feels like the W'adrhun Bosun. Like, it's not as direct, but it actually, now it has enough attacks if I attack it. I don't want to take 5 attacks per stand. Right. And it has some interesting upgrades. So this feels like a more interesting to put on the table.
Yes, and that's I've referenced this a couple times. I am working on a list inspired by another official Discord user, where it's a block of Fanatic from the Matriarch Queen Hunters. My version of it has the Fiend Hunter because I expect to fight more monsters. I believe that this guy on the Discord went with Flint Napper, I think. Probably because more Hardened in his meta, or expects to face more Hardened. But yeah, giving it Fanatic, making it Conquest Cult, and making it so it can do 3 actions, so it can volley charge with Death's Gaze, which is an artifact that gives them impact 2. And it's a cool unit, especially with 5 attacks.
That seems good. This is the one that most obviously has jumped out.
Yeah,
veterans in this seem great.
Yes.
We're going to move on to the next regiment, which is Slingers. Fun fact, I am terrified of slingers because they previously could do range damage and then have an upgrade to make that do morale checks, which terrifies me because my Ugars are only resolved 2. What has changed with slingers?
So that upgrade that you were talking about has been built into the base profile, so you don't buy it separately. It's just there. You do have to pay the points for it. So it used to be a 25-point upgrade on a 145-point unit. Now it's a 170-point unit, so it balances out. They did gain the +1 wound that most W'adrhun have. They also gained +1 volley, so they went from volley 2 to volley 3, making them a much more restricted feeling ranged unit. Before at Clash 2, they felt like mercenary crossbowmen. Volley 2, they felt like mercenary crossbowmen. Speaking of Clash 2, they went from Clash 1 to Clash 2, which fits their lore, in my opinion, because their little lore blurb on the store says how, like, a volley by them followed up by a vicious charge is, like, the scariest thing that you never want to be on the other side of with these veteran regiments. And it just felt weird that they were volley 2 Clash 1, which does not feel like a veteran elite regiment stat line. They didn't lose any barrage per stand, so they're still shooting 4 per stand. They did lose 2 inches of range, and with the changes to torrential fire, it used to be for every hit you made, you could try to make another hit, so you would roll your volley again. Now it's for every hit you make another hit, which is huge. That's spooky, but only a short range. Only a short range.
So you have to be within 9.
Which is... they can also take the Flint Napper upgrade, but since they don't have armor piercing anymore, they used to be AP1. They lost armor piercing. They don't gain any benefit for the hardened thing, but they do still get to reroll 6s to hit. Doesn't seem like that good. Like, it's a couple extra hits, but without getting the hardened bonus, it feels like why?
Yeah.
That Skirmisher's not that much better, but Skirmisher gives you +1 to move, so it sets you up to, move 7, potentially 10 with Conquest Tier 1, and get into Torrential Fire range, and then you start doing the damage, because then you're Barrage 5, and every hit that you make is 2 hits. So that's cool. Overall, decent. Not sure if I'm going to take them. I was already hesitant before. I know they've solidified their role as causing morale, which is useful, especially with how Broken works now and how it's more terrifying. So getting that extra damage, but I think the range is short and their restricted choices in a contested slot where they compete with Apex Predators and stuff.
They're restricted, yeah. And
yeah.
It is the dino. I feel you buy into W'adrhun because you want the dinos.
Yeah, so it's kind of you have to find a place for them in lists, and at a certain point, is it worth finding a place for them? So that's something that's my cold take on that is that would need to play to find out.
Okay, interesting though. Still some good changes or bigger changes in other units.
Yeah.
Next up is the first brute, Warbred. What's changed with them?
So they've gained a wound. They used to have an upgrade. This is another profile that got an upgrade rolled into it. It used to have the choice of taking Penitent to give the Burnout Draw event. Now they just straight up have the Burnout Draw event. Downside, they went from 190 to 210 points. So, you don't get the option of paying or not for the upgrade. It does make them interesting. I did run them with Burnout when I first started playing, in that first tournament that you were talking, or that wasn't on camera. Oops. But yeah, overall, they haven't really changed that much, except they've gotten more expensive and they've gotten an ability incorporated into them. So
yeah, feels like it's a way of making what's in the box represent what they should do because they don't have to make a separate upgrade. So they just get it. So it makes sense to get into the game, but less options does feel bad. So okay.
Yeah.
Moving on to Hunting Pack, another cav unit. What's going on with them in 2.0?
So they have gained 1 movement, they have lost 1 evasion, and they have gone up 10 points. It feels kind of bad because they're already only 3 wounds.
I was going to say...
Which is very, very weak. So...
The one move is...
Sorry, they went down 10 points. I said up 10 points, but they went down 10 points. But evasion 1 with 3 wounds.
I was going to say, the extra move is something they want because the way they seem to be used or intended to be used is to get forward, try to get some flanks, and move 8 helps you do that slightly. E2 is their only survival mechanism because their defense is so low. You need to depend on that. They have solo wounds. Going to E2 to E1 means 1 in 6 instead of 1 in 3 chance to evade a check. This feels like 10-point decrease isn't enough to cover that.
Yeah. Just the amount of durability lost by going from E2 to E1, and the increase in movement is weird because like with Vanguard, they're already too far ahead of your lines, but not far enough to like do anything because they can't march charge. So like you get 24 inches instead of 21 inches up. But then what do? You're still 20 inches away from the enemy, and they're peppering you with arrows the entire time.
So I think range across the board has come in a little bit, but still not enough.
No, and that's been compensated for by this getting 3 inches closer to you. So
that's actually true. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It scrubs out.
So it's still
They essentially save 10 points. I'm gonna say it differently. I would pay 10 points with this unit every day of the week to go back to E2.
Yes, absolutely, I would. Yes. 100%. I would pay 15 points. I would pay, or if it's going to be E1 3 wounds, make it 120 points. Make it something that I can truly throw away.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So and then if it makes it across the table, awesome. But 140 points, it's not quite. I can throw this away.
Yeah, if this was cheap enough where you could give another unit an upgrade or something with that savings, it would be more interesting. But yeah, here it's a tough pill to swallow.
The one cool thing that it can do with Vanguard and everything is, and Vanguard is actually irrelevant to this, but you can use this because it has fluid formation to kind of do the weird angle, like force enemies to do weird charges. Like you can send them to the middle or to the edges or something, and then have them wait around until the enemy is approaching like your important units, and then you just have them like double march and then free reform in such a way that the opponent is going to be like, oh wow, I can charge the hunting packs in the flanks, exposing my flanks to the veterans or warbred or apex predator, or I can, not engage with them, or like you can set up some bad choices, but still 140 points for screens is about how much you're paying for Aberration Blooded anyways. It's actually less. But Aberration Blooded are actually doing damage to your opponent. So.
That's the thing, is when they die, they hurt the opponent.
Yeah.
Especially when
lethal demise, too good. Yeah.
It seems like that's something you can get stuck in, and if they make it and you can keep getting the heals on it, it's going to pay way more than a... Hunting Pack are entirely designed as a throwaway unit.
Yeah.
Right? They're going to make it and get some points back or just die, but they're never going to live.
Yep.
Moving along to the next, it's the Raptor Riders, which I feel is kind of one of the more iconic W'adrhun units that I see a lot of people run.
Yes, people really like the Raptor Riders. Now, probably the most interesting non-change is that they have kept Barrage 2, Armor Piercing 1, 12-inch range. Ultimately, it does make them a more interesting ranged unit. Not a super interesting ranged unit, but still more interesting than they were before because they have somewhat competent relative to normal ranged unit shooting. So with ranges reduced, 12 inches isn't as terrible as it used to be.
A dedicated bow chosen is only 4 inches more range. So the fact you have a lot of movement means that I think they kind of scrum out there.
Yep, and Barrage 2, when a lot of units are sitting on Barrage 3, I know we've looked at a lot of Barrage 5 and Barrage 4 units with W'adrhun and and Bow Chosen and stuff, but a lot are down to 3. So 2 compared to 3, where 2 was, I was comparing 2 to 4 before, means that they're a little bit more interesting as like a range choice. They're still pretty expensive for just that little range output, but they also gained one additional wound, and they didn't change price at all. So still the exact same unit that they were before, but a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, it feels like
in the new meta.
It feels like their play spaces. They can kind of dance around, do do range attacks, and then when the moment is right, run like do the charge, get the flurry, and that kind of stuff. So where before if I have 24-inch range, like if you're dancing in that area, you're just dead.
Yeah,
so that does seem more interesting
because you do 8 attacks, and my evasion 2 isn't doing anything there. With fired advance and 8-inch move, you can also do interesting things like walk into 12 inches, throw, and then walk back 4 inches.
Oh, yeah. Moving down, we cross a bunch of unreleased models, and we're into the final entry, which is the monster of W'adrhun's Apex Predator. What has changed with them in this edition?
They've gained 5 points, or they went up 5 points. They've gained 1 attack, and they've lost 1 inch of move.
There you go.
That's Apex Predators, folks.
So, running through both these lists, obviously, I think Nords have been entirely positive. I think there's been a lot of great improvements, and I'm very excited because I think it opens up a lot of new playstyles. Like, Shaman really intrigues me. So it's all been gravy. The things that were nerfs felt like they were needed, and they either were something causing problems or negative gameplay experience. So, very excited. W'adrhun in general, I'm feeling that there has been a lot of improvement with stuff from quality of life stuff, but it still feels that there's 2 things that I think are hampering the W'adrhun. One is unreleased models. We skipped a lot of dinos, and I feel like the dino faction, the monster faction, has an Apex Predator, and that's it.
Raptor riders and hunting packs. They're not the big stompy monsters people want.
Exactly. I think people want, and that's what I would expect based on some of the art. With the addition of Quaddle to a few profiles as things, I'm hoping maybe that's something we see in the next year, even if it's a more expensive resin artist model. But it feels like if some of these missing units were added, it might open up some play experiences. So that's my first takeaway. And the second one is, it feels like they're very conservative with unit abilities and cost because they're worried that there could be an wombo combo with really good units, artifacts and regiment upgrades, and chants that would drive them into silly territory.
They have basically explicitly stated that is the reason why veterans don't have Cleave 1.
Yeah, and it feels to me like that they should get a little more risky to kind of open it up. As you and I have talked about off screen and other places that W'adrhun are placing, so maybe it's just they have a different meta, and because you're playing like a lot of Nords between me and Fisticles, that you're hitting a harder wall.
And 100 Kingdoms.
Yeah, where they're playing other things, but it still feels like they could protect Chance with bring it up to max of something to still protect wild wombo combos, but make it a little more interesting.
Oh, yeah. And then you would have like classes of units that aren't interested in certain chants. So like if Death gives +1 clash and you make it a cap of 3, then veterans aren't going to be super interested in at least tier 1 Death.
Yeah.
They'll move on to, they'll focus on maybe the more defensive ones. But yeah, it's a complicated thing. I think chants are a complicated enough mechanic where it's very hard to maintain what they're trying to make them while also making them like super useful. There are ways that they can do it, but like it sort of involves the drum beast, which means if they incorporate that into the army mechanic, then the drum beast has to do something different.
Yes.
Or if the drum beast is the only way to do it, then it makes drum beast like a mandatory pick, which I've talked to W'adrhun players like locally and some online. People already seem to feel like drum beast is a little bit of a mandatory pick because of what it does for chanting and easing, kind of greasing the wheels on it a little bit. So I don't like to see it in that state. I don't like the people to be saying, this unreleased model is an auto take. That feels bad for me as a player of this faction.
It feels bad in 2 ways. One is if it is such a cornerstone, then it should be released to give you guys that foundation. And then the second thing I'm going to assume you're going to is you don't like mandatory choices.
Yeah, is it a choice if it's basically mandatory? And if I'm making the choice to handicap myself by not taking it. Like, is that a real choice? Do I enjoy a challenge? Like, what's going on with that? But
I will say my one response is, while Conquest is a growing game, there's not all the units there.
mhm.
And I feel like when I play Nords, I've tried to play non-Jotnar lists, and I don't think it succeeded because the army feels like you do a bunch of stuff and then the Jotnars help clean up. So it's like
Yes.
a Jotnar of some amount, no matter which one of the three, feels like an auto required take. And I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever seen a successful Nord. So like I do think just at the state of release models that is where we are, but it does feel like I would go insane if I was Nords and I was looking at my hat and I had no Yacht and I was like, I need the Jotnar, I need the Cleave 3 or the Cleave 2 mountain guy. Why isn't he released? So
Yeah.
I do kind of get that if drumbeats
Yeah.
are kind of like one of the missing keys to the mechanic.
Yep.
So that does feel rough.
Veterans do bring. So one of the things that W'adrhun are missing right now, besides dinosaurs,
Yeah.
is sustainability. I think veterans do add that. I think at only 6 wounds, it's worse than when they were at 8 wounds, but they toned down the entire game.
Correct.
The entire army going from 4 wounds to 5 wounds, pretty much. That also increases the sustain, especially increasing the Matriarch Queen's healing and opening up Lethal Demise to kind of combo, because that gives you sustain and a little bit of extra damage, which is a pretty interesting thing. Because it removes enemy sustain.
Exactly. To me, as a person who plays against them, I'm very excited to see veterans get released in a month because
Yes.
I think they will add that much needed consistency where you still guaranteed some amount of chant on the base model, and then you can still pay ahead the chant marker for the
Yes.
next one to
Yeah.
set up bigger
Yep.
combos. So I agree with you. I think that will be a much better game state. I'm excited, and it sounds like they're with these changes. While some of them have been kind of side grades, kind of other things, it does feel like there's a few things brewing in your brain. So I'm excited to see what that is.
There's the Hunter Bomb, and then I take no credit for this because it's somebody else on the Discord. Multiple people have been talking about this, but there's an artifact that used to and still does give an aura of unstoppable.
Oh, that's
so nice. If you take a chieftain warlord to give Warbread shock, you take 3 units of Warbread, and then you use the aura to give them unstoppable, and you basically shoot like one missile a turn. So they're re-rolling charges. You give them burnout. You can also make them fanatic famine so that they get increased charge distance. And I forget what tier 3 famine even does now, but they get pretty big. They get extra impact hits and I think glorious charge. So they're doing 4 impact hits each. You can get them up to like Clash 4 or something, and they've got relentless blows, cleave 2.
That feels like a fun list. Like literally making Warbread bombs or missiles.
Yeah. You're just lighting them and they're launching out, and that seems intriguing. I wonder if you could do the same with like Apexes or something. Apexes are actually cheaper than Warbreads now. They're just not mainstay for Matriarch Queens. But yeah, there's so you wouldn't take a Shaman Warlord. You would take the Matriarch Queen Warlord, and then when you give them Fanatic,
she would give them.
Will you give them Fanatic,
and then you'd missile them,
and then you'd missile them one at a time. Whereas the Warlord Chieftain, you would be able to missile a bunch at a time. But yeah, that's an interesting list idea. I've got some veteran-based lists I'm looking at. I'm working the list magic. I'm working it.
Yeah, and
I'm not down and out yet. Parabellum.
Give the man his drum beast. So thanks for hanging out with us on stream for the people who have. Thanks for the people who are going to watch this video in the future. Check back. We love Conquest, and we're going to keep covering future stuff.
We love Conquest so much. Before we stop the recording, I want to show the YouTube people.
What would we?
The objective marker.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
We love Conquest so much. We love Conquest so much. We made custom objective markers with Parabellum's permission that have our logo and the Conquest logo. So expect to see battle reports.
That's what we're working on.
Signing out.
Have a good night, everyone.